Alice is no longer alive. Venti is evil, and Paimon is the goddess of the concept of life ending. Look, I'm trying. The autoplay feature makes the first few seconds of the video matter more than ever, but the first few seconds are the most heavily moderated part of the video. Anyway, if this is your first time here, I'm Souldapop, and if you want to see how I came to these conclusions, like, subscribe, and watch to the end of the video, because these are 5 of my most insane Genshin Impact conspiracy theories. Number 5. Venti is evil. Venti tells us at the beginning of the game that an Archon's power depends on the faith of the people in their nation. The reason he tells us this is to explain that he is the weakest Archon. But when we look to the other nations, what we see is that if what he says about an Archon's power is true, he should be one of the strongest Archons, if not the strongest, once Zhongli pulls off the ending of Dark Knight Rises. Think about it. At the time he tells us this, Inazuma is experiencing a civil war. Sumeru has imprisoned their Archon and is choosing to worship the former Archon instead, and Fontaine is worshipping someone who isn't their Archon. Venti has a church dedicated to him. Let me say that again. Venti is the only Archon we know of to have an entire religion centered around the worship of him. That's not to mention that shortly after this, Liyue is led to believe their Archon was given the old Ford's Theater treatment. So, either he's lying about how the Archons get their power, because at the very least, he'd have definitely been stronger than the Archon that was literally imprisoned by her own people, or he's lying about being the weakest. Well, we can be fairly certain it's not the former, because we're also told the Archons get their power from the faith of their people in both Sumeru and Fontaine. That's not to mention that we've seen him do some reality-shattering things like, oh, I don't know, bringing a soul back to the world of the living to get a dude to stop being sad, and calling in a wind that carried the past to the present. And he did those things without the Gnosis. So he lied. That doesn't make him evil. Wrong. Think about what he lied about. His power. Why would he not want us to know how strong he really is? Well, maybe it's so we don't question why Signora was able to take the Gnosis from him so easily. We would go on to Rafflestomper later. If we didn't think he was weak, it might cause us to question how she was able to pull that off. Which brings us to number 4. The Archons are in on the Fatui's plans. At the end of the Liyue Archon quest, we decide to go check with Zhongli to find out what really happened with Rex Lapis. When we arrive at Northland Bank, it's revealed to us that Zhongli was the Archon all along. But something doesn't add up here. If Zhongli was careful enough throughout this to deceive his entire nation, why would he be so careless as to tell the fairy lady where we could find him and why? Why would Signora spill the beans about the whole thing once we got there? We knew Zhongli was going to be at Northland Bank, and we know it's run by the Fatui. So it's not as though seeing Child, Signora, and Zhongli there would have exposed their plot. They could easily have waited for us to leave to trade over the Gnosis, but they didn't. No. Signora was waiting for us to get there to go through with the deal. She wanted us to find out. Not only that, but Zhongli tells us he can't tell us the terms of the contract, and that we'll have to discover the answer for ourselves throughout our journey. He also says nothing is worth a Gnosis, but whatever the Tsaritsa offered is apparently not only enough to balance the scale for the Gnosis, but also buy his silence on the matter? That doesn't seem likely unless the thing used to balance the scales requires his silence. Think about it. If there is nothing worth the value of a Gnosis, why would Nahida trade one in exchange for the truth of the world? It's clear that the Archons know something they aren't telling us. Like maybe, I don't know, the nature of the Gnosis being objects of misfortune and why the Fatui are gathering them in the first place. Number 3. Alice is no longer alive. And I know what you're thinking. We just talked to Alice in the summer event. Of course she's alive. Yeah, well, we also just talked to Anders' daughter, or M, in the same quest, who was confirmed to have kicked the bucket in Windbloom back in 3.5. So far, every time we've spoken with Alice, it's been as a disembodied voice. If that were all we had to go on, I probably would never have considered it. But Imaginarium Theater has given us some juicy details. Imaginarium Theater offers a fortune slip once per season, one of which states that Alice was the founder of the Hexen Circle. That's very interesting, because in The Little Witch and the Undying Fire, which we also obtain in Imaginarium Theater, we discover that the head witch, who should be Alice, passed on a long time ago. How do we know that the head witch in question was the head of the Hexen Circle? Because the story brings up the tea parties and name drops O, or Octavia, and how they normally don't even have a chair set out for her because she's always so far away, just like in the tea party we attend during 3.5's Windbloom. That does beg the question, however, how are Alice and M speaking with us when they're already gone? Well, that's because they know the past, present, and future of Teyvat. Obviously, in 4.8, we discover that Alice, B, and M created Simulacrum using the same principles and methods that govern Teyvat. They not only create a new world and inhabitants for it, they create constellations for those inhabitants, which, back in Unreconciled Stars, we learn aren't actually stars, but the Stella Fortuna we use to unlock a character's constellations. Constellations are what dictates a person's fate in Teyvat, which is why characters like Mona can read them to predict the future for a person with 100% accuracy. So, given what we know, that the constellations aren't actually stars but rocks hanging from a false sky, and that they exist to determine the fate of the person they represent, allow me to ask a question. Why does the Traveler have a constellation? The Traveler is not from Teyvat, so why would whoever put up the false sky have any reason to dangle some rocks for them? The only answer that makes sense is that they were placed into the false sky after the Traveler arrived. Now that we know that the Hexen Circle is capable of doing it, it should start to make sense why Alice and N keep showing up at just the right times and are always able to predict what we'll do, because they're the ones that placed our constellations in the false sky. They determined our fate, so they know our past, present, and future. If they're the ones responsible for crafting our every move and word, leaving some recordings to respond to things we're saying should be trivial. The Traveler is a witness. They are not a party. 4.8 hammered this home even harder by giving the role of the hero to Wanda and not giving the Traveler a role at all. We're just there to see it happen. They've constructed our fate, so we will be around when anything that needs witnessing happens. And they has to be Hexen Circle, because Simulacrum is a world outside of Teyvat that owes its creation entirely to 3 members of the Hexen Circle. There would be no reason for our fate to lead us there if our fate was not dictated by those witchy witches. Number 2. There are 3 Ventis. Ancient astronaut theorists, Genshin lore theorists, have long sought to explain Venti's hello voice line, where he says, "You don't remember me? Well, allow me to join you on your quest once again." The voice line implies that he's an old friend that perhaps knows more about our life than we do. Perhaps we did go on a journey between the disaster in Conria and when we woke up 500 years later and just don't remember it. But if that were the case, why is Venti the only one that remembers it when we are supposed to be the witness? No. I think that this Venti is from the future. Hear me out. In the 1.0 Archon quest, Venti tells us he knows all songs from the past, present, and future, and that he is a 3-time winner of Mondstadt's Best Bard reward. What does that have to do with anything? Well, one thing we know about Venti in the 1.0 Archon quest is that he spends a lot of time asleep and pretty much only wakes up when something really bad is happening. So, if he's AFK so often, how does he keep winning that prize? What if, when he is asleep, another Venti takes his place? Think about it. He's supposed to have already gone back to sleep, but he's still around. Shows up at least once a year. I know that sounds like a logical leap, but to bring up 3.5's Windbloom again, he's able to call a wind that brings the past to the present. And winds don't just start and stop. They move in currents. If he's bringing the past to the present, he's also moving the present to the future. If it's a cyclical current, like it would be in our atmosphere, he should also be moving the future to the past. So, if Venti is the one carrying that wind through time, the past Venti would take the place of the present Venti every Windbloom, meaning there are 3 Ventis, one from the past, one from the present, and one from the future, and they all take turns in those respective times. So each of the 3 Ventis would have knowledge of the traveler from the future, thus explaining Venti's hello again voice line. And it doesn't stop there, because Mondstadt has another god that has been missing, Istaroth, the god of time. Remember in the 3.2 quest when Rukkhadevata tells us that she is the avatar of Irminsul and split off a branch of herself to become Nahida, or how Focalors separated herself from her body to create Farina, gods creating other gods or life in general by splitting themselves into multiple parts isn't exactly unfounded. And for the god of time, it wouldn't be unreasonable to think that if they were to separate themselves to create another god, they could do so at 3 different points in time. So, not only are there 3 Ventis, but the reason Istaroth is missing is because she split herself into those 3 Ventis. Why would she do that? Well, think about it. This is Mondstadt, which is based on Germany, and even has a cathedral. Would it not be apropos for the god they worship to be part of a trinity that makes up a godhead? The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit make up God in Lutheranism and Catholicism, the inspirations for Mondstadt's religion, and Venti from the past, present, and future make up Istaroth. That was number 2. I hope you're keeping up. Number 1, Paradise Lost. If you're watching a lore video, you should know by now that Genshin has a lot of Gnostic inspirations, and that the Archons are all named after demons from the Lesser Key of Solomon, aka the Ars Goetia. However, the Ars Goetia is not the only text of historical significance that mentions those beings. One such text is John Milton's Paradise Lost. Now, Milton is a really interesting character because he wanted to be recognized as a canonized prophet, and his writing reflects that. Reading Milton is like reading the Bible, and that's by design because he wanted his writing to be part of the Bible. Because of that, he's similar to Dante with Inferno, because quite a lot of his writing has kind of been adopted into the general zeitgeist of various faiths without actually being canonical parts of them. Particularly the view of Lucifer and Satan as the same being. Now, I could spend hours going through all the parts of Genshin lore that most closely align with Paradise Lost over the Ars Goetia, or I could just draw attention to the blatant reference to Paradise Lost in the game that solidifies that it is something the writers are definitely aware of in addition to the Ars Goetia, the artifact set, Flowers of Paradise Lost. The actual lore about the artifact set is how the goddess of flowers was banished from Celestia. Pretty easy connection there because Paradise Lost is the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven. But things get a little wacky once we look into the content of Paradise Lost instead of the synopsis. And bit of a warning, things are about to get a bit NSFW. You see, in Paradise Lost, Lucifer's fall from heaven occurs when he thinks about usurping God. In that moment, sin, both a concept and an actual character, is born from his head and he becomes Satan. Then, immediately, he takes Sin, his daughter, and does exactly the worst possible thing he could do, resulting in Sin giving birth to death. And because Milton is Milton, it reads exactly like Genesis 19:30-38. If you know, you know. Now, this does play well into the Goddess of Flowers lore. She arrives in Sumeru and gives birth to the Jinn, and she encounters Desperate, who is closely tied with Sin, and they fall in love with each other, and then she encounters Rukkhadevata, Lord of Dendro, which, considering plants are life, and death doesn't exist without life, makes for a nice little motif to tie it all together. But if you're a fan of other creators in the lore space, you might already have a good idea of just how badly this is about to go off the rails, because one of the most prevalent theories about the Traveler is that they are Lucifer. Uh-oh. TLDR of that theory is that the Traveler and the Abyss Twin are stars because that's what they depict themselves as at the beginning of the game, and the Traveler actually refers to themselves as a star in one of A's voice lines, and since Lumine means light, Lucifer was said to be the brightest of God's angels, and Paimon in the Ars Goetia is Lucifer's most loyal servant, and Hebrew description of Lucifer in Isaiah refers to him as the morning star, which is Venus, which is also the evening star, making Lucifer a twin star. The twins are Lucifer. Assuming that is true, the Traveler, being Lucifer, and the Descender would represent Lucifer's fall from grace, which, going back to Paradise Lost, would mean that the Abyss Twin was born from the Traveler's fall from grace, meaning the Abyss Twin would be native to Tevat. Also, the being that was born from Lucifer's fall was Sin, which in Bedtime Story, we learn that the Abyss Twin serves the sinner, the Derfalnir. Following that line of reasoning, when the Sustainer entrapped Aether and Lumine, that reunification may have been what resulted in Paimon, like how the reunification of Satan and Sin resulted in the birth of death, and therefore, Paimon is the god of death. I'm fine. Oh man, I spent over a month on this thing and I just kept running into problems, and it's probably obvious once you get about halfway into the video what kind of problems I was running into. So please, for all the work it took to get this done, do what you gotta do. Bye!